So while we're waiting for a few more people to join us, hopefully, let me introduce you to Sammy. Sammy is our storytime snake who helps out with our Monday morning Zoom story times. And Sammy helps us do the alphabet in our Monday morning Zoom story times. So he is purple and black and white, and I'm just waiting to see what colors our snake today has. If I didn't just give it away, we're going to meet a snake today. And I don't know that I have any books about the actual kind of snake we're meeting today, but just to give you an idea, I did pull quite a few of our snake books. So there are lots and lots of choices here at the library if you want to come learn more about snakes later. And of course, you can come into any of our 7 branches to pick up books, but you can also use our online catalog to put things on hold and then just come to the front desk to get them if you don't want to come upstairs and do all the browsing while you're here. But we have all kinds, from the non-venomous to the venomous to the rattlesnakes and anacondas to deadly snake bites. It seemed to be a theme when I started picking these, that it was like a requirement to have a snake with his open mouth on the front cover. So I was glad to find that they didn't all have open mouths like that. So welcome. Good morning. I am Denise Monroe, and I'm the Youth Services Coordinator here at Massanutten Regional Library System. And I'm happy to welcome you today to our Tales and Tales with the Wildlife Center of Virginia. And Sammy. We're presenting this program as part of our Youth Summer Reading Program. So I hope everyone out there has registered for summer reading, is logging their time spent reading. Of course, time spent reading is for those of you who are 11 and under. Actual books finished are for the teens and the adults. Just keep logging. Remember, it's just like the old system. The more you read, the better your chances in the raffle drawing at the end. And I've got over 100 prizes for the raffle drawing at the end of this summer. So keep reading, keep logging those books and that minutes, and keep getting yourself in there. Today, we're going to learn about the work of the Wildlife Center of Virginia, a nonprofit teaching and research hospital for native wildlife in Waynesboro. And we're going to be meeting one of the center's non-releasable education ambassadors. In June, the adult department hosted a program with the Wildlife Center, and they met Gus, a barred owl. That presentation is still available for you to view. It's on our library's YouTube channel, and you can find links for our YouTube channel from our website, mrlib.org. But today we're meeting an animal that does not have feathers. Before we begin, just a few Zoom housekeeping notes. This presentation is in a webinar format, which means that you will only see and hear the speakers, not yourself or other attendees. Be sure to type any questions you have in the Q&A box. We will do a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If you miss part of this program, it is being recorded. Or if you want to see it again, you want to share that snake later with mom, dad, uncle, grandpa, cousins, the kid up the street, whoever it is, this is being recorded, so we will get it up on our YouTube channel later this week. Let me introduce you to our speaker today. Our speaker today is Alex Wehrung, the Outreach Coordinator for the Wildlife Center of Virginia. Alex began training as a volunteer outreach docent at the center in 2015 and joined the full-time staff as an outreach coordinator in 2016. As a member of the outreach department, Alex works to create meaningful and lasting relationships with the public in a variety of ways, such as presenting educational programs, creating website and social media content, training volunteer docents, and providing care for the center's non-releasable education ambassadors. We are delighted to have Alex and our ambassador with us today. So I am going to turn this over to Alex.
Hello, good morning. Thank you for that great introduction, Denise. My name is Alex, and I'm speaking to you live today from the Wildlife Center of Virginia. So before I go any further, I just wanted to remind everybody that just like with any kind of live program, whether it be virtual or in person, sometimes things don't go according to plan. So for whatever reason, if I get booted off the call, It'll take me just a couple seconds and I'll rejoin from my smartphone or try to restart the software. So just if that does happen, just be aware that we'll get back on quickly. So let's talk about what we'll learn about today. Well, I'll spend probably 5 or 10 minutes telling you about the Wildlife Center and what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and then you'll get a chance to meet one of our live education ambassadors. And I think that everybody probably is well aware that it's all about snakes today. So while we are learning about the Wildlife Center, I'd like everybody to think in your mind, maybe try to guess what kind of snake you'll see on camera. Remember that the education animals that live with us are all animals that can be found naturally here in the state of Virginia. So think about that. The Wildlife Center was founded in 1982. So that was more than 30 years ago. And at that time, we were one of the very first veterinary hospitals specifically and exclusively for wildlife in the country. Now, today, 30 odd years later, that is not the case. There are many different organizations that are capable and are able to take care of injured wild animals. However, there are a few things that I think makes the Wildlife Center of Virginia stand out from those other places. And firstly, I would say is that we have one of the largest number of full-time staff members. We have about 20 people that work at the Wildlife Center. Some of them are people like me who work in the Outreach and Education Department. Some of those people are those who communicate with our donors and supporters. We are a nonprofit, which means that most of the operating budget, the money that we make and spend in a year, comes from donations. And the rest of them are veterinarians, so those are doctors that care for animals, and wildlife rehabilitators. Now you can think of a wildlife rehabilitator, I think kind of like a personal trainer for wild animals. So just like you might during the school year go to gym class or PE, and your gym teacher would say, okay, class, we're doing 20 push-ups, 20 sit-ups, and we're running 10 laps around the gym. The wild animals that we care for in our hospital, they don't do push-ups, they don't do sit-ups, but there are lots of exercises that our rehabilitators can give and provide for those animals to make sure that they are strong and fit and healthy and that they're able to survive on their own. And I'll get into more detail about what kinds of animals we see here and how we care for them in just a little bit. So things that make the Wildlife Center stand out compared to other facilities is our staff members. Secondly, I would say is that the Wildlife Center is very well equipped in terms of our building and the resources that we have. So the building that I'm speaking to you right now from is in Waynesboro. And this structure was built from the ground up in the mid-90s, specifically for us, specifically with caring for wildlife in mind. So I'm on the side of the building that has kind of our offices and our desks. The other half of the building is where the clinic is, or we call that the treatment room sometimes. So when wild animals come to us in need of care, we can pretty much do any procedure or give them any medicine or anything they might need. We can do that right here in our building. That's not true for every organization that cares for wildlife. Sometimes they have to go to a regular veterinarian's office that cares for cats and dogs and other pets and see if they can help them out. But here, we can do all of that right in our building. And I think the last thing that really makes the Wildlife Center special is that we are a teaching hospital. So our official mission statement is teaching the world to care about and to care for wildlife and the environment. Really, what that means is that the way we see it, our job is to do a lot more than just patch up broken animals and send them back out into nature. We really want to use those stories of the patients that we see to educate the world, people like you guys, to help everybody understand how we can take care of wildlife every day, how we can prevent wildlife from becoming injured in the first place. So those patients that come to us, well, we actually rely on the public to transport injured, sick, or orphaned wild animals to us. So when they get here, the first thing that happens is our veterinarians will give them a really thorough medical exam. They'll look in their eyes with a bright light. They'll look in their ears. They will feel all over their body to see if there are any broken bones, to see if there are any serious injuries that need emergency attention. If that's the case, then again, we can provide most of those treatments and do most of those procedures right here in our building. If the cause of injury is not so clear, we have some options here as well. We have an X-ray machine right in our building that we can take X-rays or radiographs to look inside of an animal to look for broken bones, maybe injuries that might not be visible with the naked eye. After those emergency treatments are performed, that's when those animals are transitioned to being cared for by the wildlife rehabilitators. So if they don't need medical attention every single day, then that's when the training process starts. That's when our rehabilitators will make sure that they have the physical stamina to run or crawl or slither or fly like a wild animal should be able to do. They'll make sure that those patients are able to capture their own prey if they're a predator or run away from predators. They'll also make sure that the animals know how to act and behave like a wild animal should. And if all those things can be met, if all those things can be achieved, then that's the best case scenario. We can return them back into the wild where they belong. But that doesn't always happen. Sometimes the animals that we see in our hospital are so severely injured or they have some kind of behavioral issue. If that's true, then if they cannot survive, then we do not release them. Occasionally, sometimes, if those non-releasable patients are a species that is easy to train, if they are a species that is able to be comfortable around people and being handled, but I think most importantly, if they have a story or a background that is a chance for us to educate people about that animal, then they will live with us for the rest of their lives here at the Wildlife Center. And we don't call them patients anymore. We call them our education ambassadors. Ambassadors are representatives of their group. So that is who you're about to see live on camera. She is sitting just out of the picture frame. She travels in it's kind of like a big Tupperware container. And inside that Tupperware container is a pillowcase. So as I bring her out, remember my question I asked you at the very beginning to think about what kind of snakes live in Virginia and what kind of snake do you think this will be? Oh boy, here she is. This is Oscar. Oscar is an eastern hog-nosed snake. And she is one of, I think, my favorite ambassadors to use during programs and presentations just like this one, because usually when I do a presentation that's focused on snakes or features a snake, there are usually at least one or two people in the audience who kind of cringe. They might kind of back away. They might be a little scared. And I totally understand. It is easy to see why some people have a fear of snakes, especially when we think about their history in our culture and in our societies. If you can, think about stories that have snakes in them, books, movies, TV shows, myth and folklore and legends. Very often, if there's a snake in that story, it's the bad guy. Very often, snakes are made to be the villains. Easy to understand why some people might not like snakes when you think about the fact that most of us grow up hearing those stories. However, the reason I say I love to use Oscar during presentations is because I find that sometimes she can maybe change some people's minds about that, or at least teach them something new about snakes. As you can see, she's not mean. She's not evil, certainly. She is a beautiful representative of her species. But I'll tell you a little bit about her story and why she came here, why she ended up at the Wildlife Center, and why she joined our education ambassador team. Oscar was surrendered to the Wildlife Center in 2015 by someone who had owned her as a pet. So what we think happened, we can't be entirely sure, but what we think happened is that someone took Oscar from the wild. We think she was born in the wild, spent a portion of her life as a wild snake, and someone picked her up and wanted to keep her as a pet. At a certain point, that person decided that they didn't want her anymore. We are thankful that instead of just abandoning Oscar back into the wild, this person knew to ask if we could keep her. And the reason why that's so important is because snakes, like other reptiles that live in Virginia, like turtles, tend to live in really small areas. So eastern hognose snakes, they can be found on the coast, in the Piedmont, in the mountains. They can be found in the Carolinas, all along the East Coast. But an individual eastern hognose snake lives its whole life in a really small space. It's possible that wild hognoses spend their entire lives in an area that's maybe just 1 or 2 miles across. That's not very big. Again, that makes sense when you think about it, considering other animals. It's easier for them to move longer distances. Birds can fly. Big mammals with long legs can walk and run really far away. But if you're a little snake or a little turtle, it's not so easy to travel those long distances. So hognoses will live in really small pockets of space. And unfortunately, when they are moved to a different area, even just a couple miles down the road, when they're moved to a new habitat, they are unlikely to adapt and change their behaviors quickly enough to find the things that they need to survive: food, water, shelter, and space. It's also true that because reptiles like hognose snakes, because they live in really small areas, there are sometimes diseases or germs or parasites or viruses that are present in certain populations, but are not found a couple miles away in those same kinds of animals because they don't really cross paths that often. They stay in a little area. So if you move a snake or a turtle away from its home to a different place, chances are it could make other animals sick, and it could very likely not be able to change its behavior quickly enough to survive. So we are very thankful that Oscar's former owner knew about this and decided to ask us if we could take care of her. And again, that was in 2015. So we believe that she was about 1 year in age during 2015. That was 6 years ago. So our best guess is that Oscar is probably about 7 or 8 years old, which means that she is considered to be fully grown. This is as big as she's probably ever going to get. But hognose snakes are really, I think, really cool critters. They're really unique compared to other snake species that you'll find in Virginia. And I'll see if Oscar will tolerate being a little closer to the camera. Oh, that's a fantastic view. So if you notice, her snout is kind of turned upwards, like a hog's nose. That's where they get the name. Hognose snakes use that upturned nose. Oh, there we go. Use that upturned nose as a digging tool to burrow beneath the leaf litter, the leaves that have fallen to the forest floor. Maybe they dig around in the dirt, in the moss, looking for food. And if you're a wild hognose snake, one of the things that you love to eat are amphibians, toads and frogs and salamanders and newts. That sounds like a kind of slimy meal for us, but hognose snakes are so good at finding those animals who prefer to be in damp, moist environments, thanks to that built-in shovel that they have on top of their on the tips of their snouts. I also really love to talk about the color of her scales, because I think when most people think of bright, vibrant snakes, they might think that those animals live maybe only in the jungle or in some foreign place. But I love the black color that she has on top, and I love that kind of pumpkin orange that's on the bottom of her belly. That pattern, those colors, help her to blend in really well to where they could be found in Virginia, which is typically in forested areas. So if you can imagine yourself sitting outside in a nice sunny day like today in the forest with big tall trees around you, sunlight is kind of shining down through the tops of those trees. And on the forest floor, there are patterns of shadow and sunlight, shadow and sunlight. That dark light pattern is perfectly suited to hide or camouflage a hog-nosed snake. And you may have just heard a hiss from Oscar. That's another thing that I always talk about when I bring her on programs, is that hog-nosed snakes are, what's the right word? They're very flamboyant, they're very expressive, and they're very good actors. So when a snake feels threatened, usually the first thing it will do is try to slither away from whatever is scaring them as fast as they can. If that doesn't work, then most snakes will put on a big show. They'll hiss really loudly. They might coil up to make their body kind of seem like it's bigger. Hog-nosed snakes take it a step further. All that hissing, all that coiling is accentuated by a few different behaviors. First is they will flatten out their necks and their backs, kind of just behind her eyes. She can flatten out like a pancake. And it's thought that that flattening makes her look bigger and more threatening. But it's also postulated that that could be a hognose trying to look like a venomous snake. She's not venomous. Hognose snakes are not dangerous to people. Out of the 35 or 36 different kinds of snakes that you can find in Virginia, only 3 are venomous, and those are the rattlesnake, the cottonmouth, and the copperhead. All of those snakes share some features in common. The venomous ones share some features in common. Most pronounced, or the easiest to see visually, is that their heads look triangular. Their venom glands are situated just behind their eyes. So because Oscar doesn't have venom glands, her head is smooth. It doesn't look like a triangle. So when she flattens out her body, it's thought that she might be trying to mimic the appearance of a venomous snake. But hognose snakes will take it even one step further after that. If all else fails, if they can't scare you away, if they can't slither away, they will play dead. They'll flop over onto their backs, belly up, their tongue kind of hangs out of their mouths, their mouth kind of slides open, and they're such convincing actors at playing possum or playing dead that if we flip them right side up, they roll right back onto their backs. So because Oscar is such a good actor, that's how she got her name. An Oscar is a type of award that an actor or actress might win for doing a really good job in a movie. So we think Oscar deserves an award. That's why she has that name. And some of you may have wondered or may have noticed that Oscar is usually a name that that boys have. And there's a reason for that. Is because we thought Oscar was a boy for about 5 or 6 years. Sometimes it's really easy to tell the difference between genders in wildlife. If you think about songbirds, that's a great example. The northern cardinal, that's our state bird. Males are that really vibrant, colorful red, crimson red color, while female cardinals are brown and more subtly colored. That's really easy to tell the difference between a male and a female cardinal. With snakes, that difference in coloration it is not so easy to see and might not exist at all. And because all of their gender specific body parts, their sexual organs, they're inside their bodies, they're internal, they're soft tissue, which means that they don't even show up on x-rays very well. We took our best guess that Oscar was a boy, but just about, well, I guess it was a little less than a year ago, we were able to use one of Oscar's sheds um, and send that to a laboratory, and they were able to analyze the DNA in that shed skin, and the results came back, and he was a she. So we decided to keep her name because it's very fitting for a hognose snake. But speaking of sheds, I actually have one right here at my desk. Some of you may have seen a snake shed near your house or outside, maybe in your garage or in your attic. That's a sign that a snake has been around. They are covered in scales from snout to tail. Even their eyes have a specialized kind of scale to protect them. Snakes don't have eyelids. They can't blink like we can. But when it's time for that snake to either grow larger in size as they're developing, or seasonally, if they have eaten enough nutritious food and have enough energy, and it's time to grow some shiny, fresh new scales, they will shed the outer layer of their skin. And the shed starts, they break through on their snout, and they rub up against rocks and trees and roots and dirt to kind of help that shed slide off of their body. So this is a really cool one because it's complete. It's in one piece, which is a great sign that Oscar is healthy. If a snake can shed its skin in one go, in one piece, that's a sign that they're in good physical health. So kind of cool. You can see that this, you can almost kind of tell, if I hold it up, you can see the individual old scales on her stomach. And I might be able, if I can get the camera to focus. No, not quite. Well, I was going to say that you could even see where her eyes were on this shed. So really cool. So I'm wondering if you guys have any questions about Oscar or hognose snakes or snakes in Virginia or what we do at the Wildlife Center. So I would love to hear your questions. I think the best way to do that will be to ask in the Q&A section here on Zoom, and Denise will be reading them to me. So I'm really curious what you guys are wondering about.
Well, let's start with Oscar is an eastern hognose. Is there a western hognose? Are there other types of hognose snakes? How are they
Yes,
different?
there is a snake that's called a western hognose snake. They are similar to eastern hognose snakes in that they have the snout, the upturned snout. They are different in that they are much smaller. So, and we actually have a western hognose snake that is an education ambassador. His name is Elliot, and you can see a picture of him and learn more about him on our website. That's really easy to find. It's wildlifecenter.org. So if you want to see a picture of what a western hognose snake looks like versus an eastern hognose snake, that's the place to do it. But in terms of, yes, if there are similarities and there are differences, aside from their size, the biggest difference, as the name would suggest, is that western hognose snakes are found in kind of, well, the West. So kind of desert, arid regions, whereas eastern hognose snakes are here on the East Coast.
Okay. I don't know if you can see this well enough, but I found this picture in one of my books and it's labeled as a hognose snake. Does that look like it's more of a western hognose?
Yes, that looks like it's a western hognose to me. There are some differences in coloration between eastern and western. And just like with a lot of other animals, birds and mammals too, where an animal lives can sometimes determine the color of its scales or feathers or fur to help it blend in with its natural surroundings. So remember, eastern hognose snakes, we thought about the shadows and the sunlight coming down through the trees. Out there in the West, where western hognose snakes live, there are not a lot of trees. it's a lot of sand and a lot of, not a lot of trees, sand and red rocks and stuff. So Western hognose snakes are much lighter in color than Eastern hognose. There do exist different color variations even in Eastern hognose snakes. So I think maybe a good way to think about it is like how people have different color hair. We're still people, we're still human beings. We just have different color hair. The same can be true for hognose snakes. Yeah.
Okay. And in this picture, it's labeled as doing the playing dead tactic, is what the label tells us in the book. For anybody who wants to see that, that's Snakes by Nick Bishop. Let me see. I've got some other questions down here in the Q&A. Do you have to wash your hands after you hold the snake?
Yes, yes. I always have a bottle of hand sanitizer with me whenever I handle snakes for presentations. But also we have hand sanitizer and we wash our hands between handling of our education snakes when it comes to like their daily care. So like feeding and cleaning their enclosures and misting their enclosures to make sure it's nice and humid for them. We always wash our hands between each and every snake for a few important reasons. Firstly is to protect them. Our germs could potentially make them sick. We don't want to harm them in any way, but also snakes do carry some viruses and diseases that are very easily transmissible to other snakes. Things that can be transferred from animals to people are known as zoonotic diseases. So one that you may have heard of is salmonella. Birds also carry salmonella. Snakes do, but actually pretty serious wildlife issue that snakes are facing in Virginia right now is something called snake fungal disease. And kind of like the name sounds like, it is a fungus that attacks snakes and can be lethal. And it is very, very easy to transmit from snake to snake. So in addition to washing our hands each time we handle a snake, our veterinarians and rehabilitators wear latex gloves. For each patient, it's a brand new pair of latex gloves. So that's just to keep everybody safe, humans, ambassadors, and patients alike.
Thank you for that question, Mercy. So it's just as important to wash your hands for the snake as it is for ourselves. Hannah has a question. Hannah wants to know, do either of the two venomous snakes in the West, the copperhead and the timber rattler, do they ever get in the water?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. So this kind of makes me think about a question that I tend to get pretty frequently during programs with snakes is, there's a snake in my garage. How do I get rid of it? There's a snake in my garden. I don't want it to be there. What do I do? The answer is, well, it's complicated, but it's also really simple. Snakes go where there's food and shelter and water. So if a snake is seeking a place that's out of the rain, that is protected from the sun, or especially the cold weather during the winter, they're going to go to where they can find those things the most easily. And that very often means people's garages, people's basements. To get a snake to leave an area, if you really don't want it to be there, even though snakes, they're really not harmful to people unless you provoke them. The best way to do that is to remove those resources. So if you have a brush pile of sticks in your garden, that's a great home for a snake. Consider removing that brush pile. So the reason that made me think of that is because thinking of those venomous snakes, rattlesnakes and copperheads and cottonmouths, certainly they can be found in the water because that's where food is. The diet for those snakes can be kind of varied depending on the area that we're talking about. It could be rodents like mice and rats, chipmunks, squirrels. It could be insects like beetles, cicadas that are coming out this year. That can also mean toads and frogs, and maybe even a fish if they were fast enough to catch it. Snakes, just like pretty much every other animal, they go to where they can find their resources. So if there's food near the water, yep, they can be found there. And as far as I know, all snakes are good swimmers too.
Well, the follow-up question that came in was asking about, does that mean rivers? So
Yes.
yes,
Yeah,
okay.
rivers, I would say probably not like fast flowing rivers. If there's whitewater rapids, it's probably not very easy for a snake to swim through. But lakes, rivers, streams, certainly. I've seen many, many snakes in our area um, gliding through the water. They're very graceful.
All right. Susan was asking about the lifespan of the eastern hognose. You talked about how old Oscar is, but how long do you expect Oscar to live? And is that different in the wild versus at the center?
Yes, there is a big difference. In the wild, honestly, I don't have a specific number on how old that an eastern hognose snake might reach or become, but I would say that my educated guess is that 10 years would be an achievement for a wild hognose snake, because it's hard out there for wild snakes. They're having to find their own food, they're having to find shelter, but snakes, because they occupy this kind of middle position within the food chain or the food web, they are predators, they hunt other animals, but they are also prey for other predators. So in Virginia, that means that wild hognose snakes would have to worry about being captured and being eaten by coyotes, foxes, skunks, raccoons, certainly birds of prey like hawks and falcons and eagles and owls. So and not to, those are just the natural predators. On top of that, throw in human-caused conflicts or situations like being hit by a car if they're trying to cross a road, or somebody deciding that they don't want that snake in their garden and maybe killing that snake. It's a dangerous world for hognoses in the wild. At the Wildlife Center, it's a different story. Oscar has nothing to worry about. She is fed nutritious meals according to her needs and her weight. She has an enclosure that's cleaned regularly. It's misted, so during the winter when the air kind of dries out, we spray it down to make sure it's nice and humid. She has a heat lamp. She has a UV lamp. There's not a lot that she has to worry about. So I would expect, I'd say it's not unreasonable to think that a hognose snake in captivity might reach an age that's maybe twice as old as a wild hognose snake. So maybe up to 20 years, maybe.
Okay. Lydia would like to know what happens if a non-venomous snake bites you.
Not much. I have personally never been bitten by any snake, wild or our ambassadors, but I have heard stories from the veterinarians who have been treating wild snakes that have been particularly feisty, that being bitten by a non-venomous snake feels less painful than a cat scratch, which that is logical when you think about the difference of the difference between a venomous snake's teeth and a non-venomous snake's teeth. Venom is injected. So other animals that are venomous are like scorpions. They have a stinger. What else? What else is venomous? In stingers or fangs. That's how venom is injected. So a venomous snake, they will usually have two large, long fangs in the top of their mouths, like a needle injecting that venom. Non-venomous snakes, they don't have those two gigantic fangs in the front. They have lots of little teeth all on their top and bottom rows. So those little teeth, like I said, feels less than a cat scratch, but just the same, if you got scratched by a cat, you would just use soap and water to clean it. And really, that's all you need to do.
Okay, soap and water cures lots of things. Mercy is asking about what a snake eats, particularly, will snakes eat fruit? Do they like fruit?
No, snakes do not eat fruit. Every single snake in the world is either carnivorous, insectivorous, or a combination of those two. Carnivores are animals that eat only meat, other animals. Insectivores are animals that eat only insects, bugs like spiders and beetles. Um, for hognose snakes, it's a combination of the two. Um, you can think about the shape of Oscar's mouth. Remember, I mentioned that they tend to favor amphibians, but she has kind of a small to medium-sized mouth, which means that she would eat small to medium-sized prey items. And it is a common misconception or misunderstanding that a snake can unhinge its jaw to open really wide. Technically, that's not true, but the ligaments that connect their jaws to their skulls are really, really stretchy. So while they don't really become like disconnected, they can stretch really wide. And proportionately, if we had the same kind of ability, we would be able to swallow a watermelon in one gulp without chewing, which is very strange to picture in your mind. But scale that down to a mouth that's as big as Oscar's. So that was a really bad example. I just used a fruit as an example, but no, Oscar does not eat fruit. No snake in the world eats fruit.
Okay. It'll make me think about that watermelon differently later. Um, Hannah is asking, is there a time of day or maybe a specific type of weather that happens when you might expect to see snakes moving about versus hiding?
Certainly. Snakes are like many reptiles that live on land. They are cold-blooded, or I think it's ectothermic is the technical term. That means that they are unable to maintain a constant internal body temperature. Humans can. So if it's the middle of winter or the middle of summer, our body temperature usually stays around 98.6 degrees. Snakes and other reptiles, they can't do that. That means that they rely on the warmth of the sun or the heat rising off of a park, like the asphalt on a road or the rocks or the soil around them to kind of kickstart their bodies and get their engines going. So when it's really warm outside during the summer, during the daytime, when the sun is shining down, that's when snakes are the most active. That's when they have the most energy, which means that they are able to hunt. During the nighttime, most snakes will kind of hide out, will sleep until morning. During the winter time, when it's really long stretches of the year, when it's cold, when the sun is not in the sky for as long, when it's cloudy or snowy, that's snakes are snakes typically will enter a hibernation-like state. That's called brumation, where they will kind of just hang low. They'll kind of be under the radar, coiled up under a rock, maybe some nice little nook or cranny they found that's protected from the elements, and they can just wait it out until the springtime. So that the downside of not being able to control your own body temperature is that you rely on the weather, you rely on the sunshine to get you going. But the benefit is that they don't need to eat as much as other animals. They're not spending those calories constantly maintaining that temperature, which means that in the wild, a snake could easily go 2 or 3 or 4 weeks without eating anything and be totally fine. So certainly warm, sunny weather during the daytime is when you will see snakes most active.
All right. I think we have time for a few more questions, and I've got at least 2 more in the Q&A box here. Does walking around with your dog help keep the snakes away from you?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I think that I would, well, probably, because snakes, it's a really cliche saying, but it's true. They're more afraid of us than we are of them. So uh, in 99.999% of cases, a snake will just try to slither away from you as fast as they can. Um, Probably if you're walking with a dog on a leash, you're making more noise than you would. All those, excuse me, all those, your footsteps combined with all 4 of your dog's paws stomping on the ground, snakes can feel those vibrations. So probably, yeah, walking with a dog might deter snakes.
Follow-up to that seems to be, what about having the dog splashing in the river with you?
Yeah, probably. Snakes kind of want to be left alone.
Okay. And then I have one here from Lydia that says, if you put a snake in a cage, do they try to get out?
Ooh, sometimes, yeah. So that's actually why Oscar travels in a Tupperware container that has small holes drilled in to let air flow in and out. And inside of that Tupperware container is a pillowcase. So the reason that Oscar travels in the pillowcase is because snakes, when they explore places, when they're searching for little gaps to fit through, they always go snout first. So that pillowcase is there to not only kind of contain her and keep her safe, but also protect her little nose that might get, sore from bumping up against the side.
All right. And I'm going to ask one last question, Alex.
Mm-hmm.
If someone watching today or in the recording later needs help rehousing an animal, how do they reach you all? What's the best way to reach the Wildlife Center?
Sure. So you can reach the Wildlife Center at any time. 9 o'clock to 5 p.m. is when our front desk staff are answering the phones, answering emails, and that's 7 days a week. If it's after hours, if it's like 1 o'clock in the morning, you can still get in touch with somebody. You can call our phone and you'll get the number for the on-call phone. So if it's an emergency, if a wild animal is in danger or needs help right away, you can always get in touch with us from the phone or from email or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever.
Okay, so an emergency for after hours, just hiding out in your garage, please wait until 9 a.m.
That's a good rule of thumb. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Alex, for everything today, for introducing us to Oscar. And we hope to be able to see you again sometime soon.
Yes, thank you all so much for tuning in today. I hope you learned a little bit more about Oscar. If you didn't like snakes before, I hope maybe your mind has changed, or at least you learned something new. So thank you guys so much.
All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.